My husband Charles had a nasty habit of calling my family nobodies. It was a cruel little dig he'd perfected, a constant reminder that, in his eyes, I'd come from nothing. But the smug, self-satisfied look on his face dissolved, melting away until his skin was a pasty, ghostly white the moment my father's private jet touched down. It was carrying a team of lawyers, men poised to systematically dismantle every last piece of the empire he thought he owned. It all unraveled with breathtaking speed. One moment, we were the very picture of domestic bliss, our laughter echoing around a dinner table, heavy with the rich scent of prime rib. The next, Charles had turned on me, his words honed to a sharp, venomous point. I'd always known he had a cruel streak, a talent for remarks that could cut you to the bone. But I had never, in all our years together, imagined he could wield that cruelty with such surgical precision, aiming to inflict the deepest, most painful wound possible. The evening had started with a deceptive warmth. It was a grand family get-together, one of those rare occasions where both our families converged, filling our sprawling home with a chaotic symphony of chatter and half-remembered stories. His parents were there, of course, impeccably dressed and exuding that quiet, effortless air of old money. My parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins brought a different energy, more boisterous, more heartfelt. The air should have felt light, a vibrant tapestry woven with joy and reconnection, but a tight knot of unease had been coiling in my stomach all night. I'd caught Charles glancing at me with a look I couldn't quite decipher, a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, lending a predatory edge to his smile that made my skin crawl. We were all gathered at the long, polished mahogany table, our plates laden with food. Charles, holding court as he always did, was boasting about a recent real estate venture, a massive deal he claimed would catapult him into an entirely new stratosphere of success. But as it always did, the conversation eventually spiraled back to me, to my family, to where I came from. "Well, Emily," Charles began, leaning back in his chair with a theatrical sigh. A laugh rumbled in his chest, but it was hollow, entirely devoid of genuine humor. "It's funny, isn't it? I mean, here I am, juggling these multi-million-dollar projects, orchestrating these grand plans for our future, and then there's you. Just a girl who came from absolutely nothing." The world seemed to slow to a crawl. I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process if I had heard him correctly. But he wasn't finished. "Oh no, he was just getting warmed up. I mean, seriously," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward my side of the table. "Look at your family. You know, nobodies, just regular folks, huh? It's almost cute how they try to pretend they belong in a place like this." My hands, hidden beneath the crisp linen tablecloth, clenched into tight fists, my nails digging painful crescents into my palms. A suffocating tightness constricted my chest, but I fought to keep my face a neutral mask. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to focus on the clinking of silverware, the low hum of other conversations, but his mocking tone, the sheer, unadulterated ridicule in his voice, had lodged itself in my mind like a shard of glass. I scanned the faces around the table, a desperate, silent plea for someone, anyone, to intervene, to defend me. But every gaze was averted. My own family looked down at their plates, their faces a painful mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. His family simply wore faint, polite, unreadable smiles. No one wanted to challenge Charles, the man of the hour, the one who held all the cards. In that moment, I felt utterly, crushingly small, insignificant. My mind was a chaotic storm. How could he say that, in front of everyone? I had fought and scraped for every achievement, worked tirelessly to build a life for myself, and here he was, dismissing it all with a careless, condescending wave of his hand. But the worst part, the truly soul-crushing part, He said it with such casual cruelty, as if it were a harmless joke, a playful jab between lovers. It wasn't the first time he'd flaunted his sense of superiority, but this was different. This was a calculated, deliberate strike aimed directly at my heart, designed to humiliate me in the most public and painful way possible. A primal urge to scream, to fling my plate of food across the room, to tell him what a vile, ignorant fool he was, surged through me. But I choked it down, my throat burning with the effort. I could feel the hot sting of tears welling in my eyes, and I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. Murmuring a barely audible excuse, I pushed my chair back and walked away from the table, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I had to get away before I did something I'd regret. I found refuge in the quiet solitude of the living room, the cold glass of the large bay window pressing against my forehead as I stared out into the inky blackness of the night. The city below was a tranquil sea of twinkling lights, blissfully unaware of the tempest raging inside of me. My own reflection stared back, and for a moment I didn't recognize the woman in the glass. Her eyes were wide with hurt, her mouth a thin, tight line of fury. She looked broken. I wanted to smash the glass to obliterate that fragile, wounded image. Instead, I just stood there. And finally, I let the tears fall, silent hot tracks carving paths down my cheeks. How could he say those things about my family? My parents had dedicated their entire lives to giving me opportunities they never had, working thankless jobs and sacrificing their own dreams so that I could chase mine. They weren't wealthy, they didn't have impressive titles or live in a sprawling mansion, but they had integrity. They had unconditional love. They had a quiet, profound strength that Charles, in all his materialistic glory, would never ever be able to comprehend. But then, something shifted deep within me. A spark of defiance ignited in the cold ashes of my humiliation. I refused to be this weak, shattered woman. I was more than his cruel, dismissive assessment. I was the daughter of people who had taught me the true meaning of hard work, of loyalty, and of dignity. And if Charles was too blind, too arrogant to see that, then he didn't deserve me. He didn't deserve any place in my life. I was not going to let him or anyone else define my worth. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand, a new steely resolve hardening in my chest. No more. I whispered the words to my reflection. No more. I would never again allow anyone, especially Charles, to make me feel small. I would show him. I would show them all that I was capable of, so much more than he could ever possibly imagine. The thought of revenge wasn't a hot, blinding flash of rage. It was a cold, calculated clarity. I had the power to make him rue the day he ever chose to insult me and my family. I wasn't just Emily, a woman who came from nothing. I was Emily, a woman with a family who adored her, a woman with a hidden strength that Charles could never touch. And if he thought he could break me with mere words, he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. From that moment forward, I promised myself I would make him pay for every single hurtful word, every dismissive sneer. I didn't know how yet, but I would ensure that Charles learned exactly who I was. And in doing so, I would prove to myself just how strong I had become. The next time he saw me, he wouldn't know what hit him. I couldn't dispel the simmering anger that coursed through me as I sat in the guest room, staring out at the silent, sleeping city. The echo of Charles's words was a relentless drumbeat in my head, each syllable a fresh jab that made my blood boil. But as much as my mind fixated on the insult, another feeling began to surface. It was a nagging sense of urgency, an insistent pull to understand my own story, my own history, in a way I never had before. I had always known my father, Edward, as a quiet, unassuming man. He was a simple consultant, or so I had been led to believe. We grew up in a modest, comfortable home in a quiet suburb, and I never thought to question our lifestyle. My mother would often say, "We may not have a lot of money, Emily, but we have more than enough love." For me, that had always been enough. But tonight, something had fundamentally shifted. Charles hadn't just humiliated me. He had attacked the very foundation of my identity, the roots from which I grew. The weight of his scorn made me feel rootless, as if I truly was nothing. But was it true? Was I as insignificant as he wanted me to believe? I knew I needed to learn more about my father, about my family's past. If I was going to seize control of this narrative, I first had to understand its origins. It was time to delve into the parts of my family history that I had always overlooked or simply accepted at face value. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house, my mind a whirlwind of questions. I found myself in the attic, surrounded by the dusty relics of our past, digging through old file boxes, forgotten letters, and anything that might offer a clue. I pulled out heavy, leather-bound photo albums, the yellowed plastic pages crinkling as I turned them, and then I saw it, a photograph that stopped me cold. It was my father, younger, standing beside a man I'd never seen before. They were shaking hands in front of what looked like a government building, their smiles broad and confident, but it was the aura of the man next to my father that struck me. He wasn't just some business acquaintance. He radiated power. I didn't know it at that moment, but this man, this single photograph, was the key to a truth that would change everything. I took a picture of the photo and called my mother, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked her about it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the subtle shift in her tone, a sudden guardedness. "Oh, Emily, you don't need to worry about ancient history. Your father. He's always been a very private person," she said, her voice a little too breezy. I pressed on, my own sense of urgency overriding my usual deference. "Mom, I have to know, who is that man? What was Dad really doing?" Silence. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Finally, she let out a long, weary sigh. "I think it's time you knew the truth, honey. Your father is more than he's let on. He's an intensely private man, yes, but he isn't just a simple consultant. He's involved in some very, very powerful circles." A chill snaked down my spine. The world I had known, the simple, loving life I thought I understood, was beginning to fracture and unravel right before my eyes. My father, the quiet, modest man who had always faded into the background at family events, was so much more than I had ever conceived. I pushed for more details, and she told me that my father had intentionally kept his immense wealth and influence hidden, preferring to live a normal life, away from the public eye. He believed true wealth wasn't in what you showed, but in the security and freedom you could provide for your family without the burdens of fame. It wouldn't be until much later that I would grasp the sheer scale of his reach. After we hung up, I sat in the dusty attic in stunned silence. My mind reeled. Why had he kept this a secret for my entire life? Was my whole upbringing a carefully constructed facade? In a twisted way, had Charles been right about me, if not my family? I was completely lost, unsure of my next move, but my mother's words echoed in my head. My father had always kept an eye on things, she'd said. Now I was beginning to understand just how closely he watched. Driven by this new knowledge, I went from the attic to his old study. I dug deeper, and the more I learned, the more my world tilted on its axis. My father's name wasn't just known in some local business circles. It was a name that commanded respect on an international stage. He held covert investments in global corporations, owned properties in countries I'd only read about, and maintained connections that reached into the highest echelons of government and finance. His private jet wasn't a symbol of luxury. It was a strategic tool used to move himself and those under his protection in and out of complex situations that most people couldn't even fathom. The more I uncovered, the more I understood. My father had always been there, a silent guardian watching over me in ways I had never perceived. He had known about Charles long before I even met him. He had known about the subtle cruelties, the belittling comments, the slow erosion of my confidence. And he had done nothing. Not until now. As the pieces of this enormous puzzle began to click into place, a strange sense of empowerment washed over me. This was my family. This was my heritage. And it was infinitely more complex and powerful than I had ever realized. I wasn't just a girl from nothing, as Charles had so carelessly spat. I was the heir to a legacy, one that stretched far beyond what anyone, especially him, could possibly imagine. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father had known everything. He had watched me struggle. He had seen how Charles treated me. But instead of intervening, he had waited. He had waited for the right moment, for the perfect trigger. And now I knew why. This dinner, this public humiliation was it. It was his signal. It was his way of showing me that I was not powerless. The strength had always been inside me. But now, finally, I had the knowledge to wield it. My next move became crystal clear. I had no intention of letting Charles get away with this. But a head-on confrontation was not my father's style, and it wouldn't be mine either. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my anger. Instead, I would orchestrate his downfall with the same quiet, devastating precision my father operated with. When the time was right, he would be the one left stunned, powerless, and utterly broken. And this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my identity. It was about proving to myself that I was not defined by his insults. I was Emily. I was my father's daughter, and I came from a legacy that commanded respect. I closed my eyes, picturing the day when it would all come crashing down, when the secrets my father had so carefully guarded would be brought into the light, and Charles would finally understand how profoundly, how catastrophically he had underestimated me and us. And so my journey began, not just a quest to confront Charles, but a mission to reclaim the very essence of myself that I had allowed him to diminish. I was fighting for my identity. I was fighting for my strength, and I knew one thing for certain. I was not who Charles thought I was, and soon he would learn that lesson the hard way. The more I learned about my father's clandestine life, the more I felt like a stranger in my own skin. It was like discovering a secret room in the house you grew up in, a room that changed the entire architecture of your reality. There was a gravity to this new knowledge, a heavy weight that settled deep in my chest. I had always seen Edward as just my father, my quiet, gentle dad. But now I saw him as a figure of immense, almost unimaginable power. I spent the next several days immersed in research, my life becoming a blur of encrypted files and hushed phone calls. I dove into every scrap of information I could find, determined to leave no stone unturned. Every document I unearthed, every secret I exposed, added another intricate layer to the sprawling mystery of my family. The truth was becoming undeniable. My father wasn't just a businessman, he was the architect of a shadow empire. And I, whether I had known it or not, was his heir. But as the puzzle pieces fell into place, a more unsettling truth began to surface. If my father had been monitoring me all these years, then he knew every single detail about Charles. He'd been aware of what was happening behind the closed doors of my marriage. He knew about the mockery, the condescension, the belittling of my family, and he had done nothing. It wasn't a lack of care, I began to understand. It was a choice. He had chosen to remain in the background, observing, waiting. I wasn't sure what disturbed me more, that my father had allowed me to endure that humiliation alone, or that he knew everything and had deliberately decided not to intervene. At least, not until now. I sat in my home office, staring at the documents scattered across my desk, feeling the immense weight of the decision I had to make. I was done being a passive observer in my own life. I was done being the one left to clean up the emotional wreckage. This was about my life, my dignity. I wasn't going to wait for my father to handle it from afar. It was time for me to take the reins. As I sat there lost in a spiral of thought, my phone buzzed on the desk. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen, but some instinct told me to answer. I picked it up, and before I could even say hello, a calm, measured voice spoke on the other end. "Ms. Emily," the voice said, its tone professional and steady. "This is Mr. Thorne. I've been assigned by your father to ensure your safety and well-being. I believe you're now aware of the situation regarding your husband." My heart hammered against my ribs. My father had been watching me. Right now. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "The insult at the dinner party, Ms. Emily," Mr. Thorne continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "We've been keeping a close watch on your husband's activities for some time. We have seen enough. It is time to take action." A profound chill ran down my spine. This was real. This wasn't just my anger or my desire for payback anymore. My father had seen it all, and now his formidable machinery was grinding into motion. "Your father has already set the wheels in motion," Thorne said. "We are prepared to move forward. We have the resources, the legal backing, and the necessary evidence. We are going to ensure your husband understands the full consequences of his actions." A strange cocktail of emotions coursed through me. Relief, fear, and a sharp, thrilling excitement. The revenge I had been fantasizing about was no longer a dream. It was within my grasp. But it wasn't just mine to execute. It was being fueled by my father's power, his legacy, and his will. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, and I was ready to see this through to the end. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice gaining strength. "Trust us," Thorne replied simply. "Everything is already in motion. You don't need to worry about a thing. Just remain where you are, and we will handle the rest." I placed the phone back on the desk, my heart thundering in my ears. In the span of a few days, everything had changed. My life, my marriage, my entire sense of self, all of it was shifting in ways I could never have anticipated. I was no longer just Emily. I was someone with power, with a history, and with the means to forge my own future. I spent the next few hours pacing my house, a caged animal waiting for the signal to be unleashed. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Charles, the way he had humiliated me, the way he had dismissed my family. He thought he could control me, belittle me into submission. He had no idea who I really was. I wasn't just his wife, some insignificant woman who didn't matter. I was Edward's daughter, the inheritor of a legacy, someone who would not be pushed around. The anger and hurt I had suppressed for so long began to bubble up again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the helpless frustration of being demeaned, it was the focused energy of someone about to take back everything. I was not going to let Charles win. I would not let him get away with making me feel like nothing. As the hours crept by, I heard it, the distant, powerful hum of a jet engine slicing through the sky. My heart leaped. I knew what it meant. Knew what? My father's private jet had arrived, and with it, the team of lawyers, the team that would bring Charles's world crashing down around him. The jet landed at a private airfield not far from my house, and a sense of profound inevitability washed over me. This was happening. There was no turning back. I stood by the window, watching in my mind's eye as the team of sharp-suited lawyers gathered their briefcases, their faces grim and determined, preparing to descend upon Charles. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of deep satisfaction and a flicker of unease. This was everything I had wanted, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a world I was not fully prepared for. My father's empire was vast and shadowy, and I was only just beginning to comprehend its true scale. But there was no room for doubt now. This was the moment I had been waiting for, And as I imagined the lawyers marching toward Charles's gleaming office tower, I knew that everything was about to change. My life was no longer defined by his insults. My life was finally mine to control, and I would never let anyone, least of all Charles, take that away from me again. The morning after the call from Mr. Thorne felt like the deceptive calm before a hurricane. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a relentless tempest. Now, as the first rays of dawn filtered through my window, I was acutely aware that my life had been irrevocably altered. My father's jet had landed, delivering a legal strike force ready to dismantle Charles's carefully constructed world. I could feel the tension coiling in my gut. The plan was in motion. Soon Charles would learn the fatal error of messing with the wrong person. As I moved through the quiet house, the gravity of what was about to unfold pressed down on me. I had never envisioned my life taking such a dramatic, almost cinematic turn. But in a strange way, I felt a sense of relief. The anger that had been festering inside me for years was finally being channeled into decisive action. I was no longer a passive victim in my own story. I was an active participant in something far larger, far more powerful, and I finally had the chance to fight back. I glanced at my phone, a new message from Mr. Thorne. "We are ready to move. Stay calm and trust that everything is covered. The legal team is in position." I took a deep, steadying breath. There was no going back. I had to trust them. I had to trust my father, even if a part of me was still grappling with his years of inaction. But it didn't matter now. I was standing on the precipice of a new life, and I couldn't afford to look down. The next few hours passed in a surreal blur. Another message from Thorne arrived, this one detailing Charles's schedule for the day. The lawyers were set to intercept him during a high-stakes board meeting at his office. It was all so meticulously planned, so chillingly precise. I was astounded at the level of detail and resources that had been mobilized. Everything was falling into place like clockwork. I couldn't help but picture Charles at that moment. He was likely swanning around his office, basking in his own arrogance, completely oblivious to the storm about to break over his head. He had always believed he was untouchable. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I spent the next hour pacing, my nervous energy too much to contain. The very air in the house felt thick, charged with an electric anticipation. Then the doorbell rang, the sound jarring me. My heart leaped into my throat. I hurried to the door and opened it to find a sleek black SUV idling at the curb. A man in a sharp dark suit stepped out, a leather briefcase in his hand. "Ms. Emily," he said with a curt, respectful nod, introducing himself as one of my father's senior legal counsels. "We are ready to proceed. Are you prepared?" I nodded, a wave of both relief and profound anxiety washing over me. "I'm ready." We drove to Charles's office building in downtown, the SUV gliding through the city streets with an almost unnerving precision. I kept my eyes fixed on the blur of the cityscape, but my mind was a whirlwind. I thought about everything that had led to this point, the years of tolerating Charles's condescension, the countless times he had belittled me, the constant gnawing feeling that my past made me unworthy in his eyes. All of that was about to be rectified. When we arrived, I remained in the car as the legal team entered the building. My presence wasn't required yet. My role was to come later. I could only imagine the shockwave that would ripple through that boardroom when the team presented Charles with the evidence they had compiled. It was time for him to understand that his empire wasn't built on a foundation of stone, but of sand. I felt my pulse thrumming in my wrists as I waited, each minute stretching into an eternity. What was happening up there? I couldn't stand the suspense. I texted Thorne, a simple question, "Update?" The reply was almost instantaneous. "Everything is proceeding as planned. He has been served with the initial documents. He is furious, but is attempting to play it off as a nuisance." I leaned back in the plush leather seat, gripping the door handle. I knew Charles, I knew his playbook. That bravado would shatter the moment the lawyers moved from generalities to specifics. The man who thought he could control every variable and manipulate every person was about to confront a truth he couldn't spin. A few minutes later, the car door opened. One of the lawyers, the one who had picked me up, leaned in. "It's time," he said quietly. I nodded and followed him out of the car, my heels clicking purposefully on the pavement. The inside of Charles's office was as pristine and ostentatious as ever, all glass and chrome, with a panoramic view of the city. Charles was behind his colossal desk, his posture rigid, his face a mask of barely concealed fury. When he saw me walk in, his eyes narrowed into slits. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dripping with venom. "What are you doing here?" The senior lawyer stepped forward, holding a thick binder. "Mr. Collins," he began, his voice calm and authoritative, slicing through the tension. "We are here to present evidence regarding your business dealings, specifically a pattern of questionable financial practices and numerous legal violations." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Charles's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it, his arrogance reasserting itself. "This is a joke," he scoffed. "You think you can come in here and intimidate me with a stack of papers? I don't have time for this nonsense." But the lawyer was relentless. "We also have detailed information regarding your undeclared offshore accounts, the network of shell companies you've used to launder money, and a series of illegal transactions that have been conducted under your direct supervision. We have everything, Mr. Collins. Proof, sworn testimonies, and digital records that link you to multiple criminal activities." The color drained from Charles's face, each statement landing like a physical blow. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. He looked at me then, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified disbelief. "You," he rasped. "You did this." I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. I didn't have to say a word. I just watched as the truth slammed into him like a freight train, the weight of his own lies finally crashing down. His empire, the one he had built on a bedrock of deceit and cruelty, was beginning to crumble, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I suggest we review these documents in detail, Mr. Collins," the lawyer said, his tone unwavering. Charles looked from the lawyer to me, and then he sank back into his expensive chair, his hands trembling visibly. For the very first time since I had known him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It was a strange, grimly satisfying sight. This was what he deserved. This was the consequence of treating me like I didn't matter, of believing he could tear down the very essence of who I am. But even as I watched him fall apart, a part of me felt hollow. This wasn't just about seeing him lose. It was about my own redemption. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but I didn't want it to come at the cost of losing myself in the process. I had reclaimed my power, but I was still unsure of what to do with it. As the lawyers methodically continued their presentation, I stepped back, letting the gravity of the moment settle over me. I had taken the first decisive step, but I knew there was a long road ahead. This wasn't just the end of Charles. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me, a chapter where I would no longer be passive, a chapter where I would stand tall, defined by no one's standards but my own. I stood in the corner of Charles's sleek, glass-walled office, a silent observer to the systematic demolition of a man. My hands trembled slightly, a physical manifestation of the storm of emotions raging within me, excitement, nervousness, and a cold, hard satisfaction. This was it, the moment of reckoning I had fantasized about for weeks. Charles, who had always been so perfectly in control, was adrift, his kingdom of arrogance and manipulation crumbling into dust right before his eyes. The legal team was a force of nature, calm and implacable. The documents, the evidence, the recordings, they had everything. But this was about more than just paperwork. It was a demonstration. It was proof that I was not some insignificant woman who had appeared from nowhere. I was not the person Charles had tried to mold me into. I had a legacy, a powerful one, and it was time he finally understood that. I watched his face, a fascinating canvas of shifting emotions, as he flipped through the pages of the legal findings. His confident facade had been shattered, and now all that was left was raw shock and disbelief. His hands shook. The arrogance he had worn like a second skin for years now lay in tatters at his feet. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the frantic calculations of a man realizing he was completely outmatched. This wasn't a problem he could bully, bribe, or charm his way out of. For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph, but it was quickly tempered by a dull ache deep inside. This wasn't just about making him pay. It was about proving to myself that I had the strength to reclaim what was mine. But I was acutely aware of the emotional price of this power, the toll it had taken on me. As the lawyers continued their dispassionate presentation, my thoughts drifted to the true architect of this scene, my father, Edward. He was the puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows, his immense influence making this entire operation possible. The quiet, stoic man I knew as my father was a phantom, a man who commanded a vast, hidden empire, with connections and power that defied my imagination. It wasn't just his wealth that had stunned me. It was the realization that he had been a silent guardian my entire life, ensuring I was never truly in danger. He had seen how Charles treated me, and he had understood that mere words would never right the wrongs. He knew that the only way to deliver true justice was to strike Charles where he was most vulnerable: his fortune, his reputation, and his power. And now he was doing just that. Still, it was an unsettling thought. The fact that my father had watched from the periphery, allowing me to accumulate the emotional scars left by Charles, made me question everything. Had he been waiting for this exact moment? Had he known with some chilling prescience that Charles would eventually cross a line so egregious that it would demand this level of response? Or was this simply how my father operated, always 10 steps ahead, his true intentions veiled in secrecy? The more I pondered it, the more I realized this was about something far bigger than me. It wasn't just revenge for the insults or the years of feeling powerless. It was about the colossal, unseen forces that had been shaping my life without my knowledge. I was no longer just Emily. I was a part of a legacy that had been building for generations, something far larger than my small, suffocating world with Charles. The office door swung open and 2 more lawyers entered, their faces impassive. They were followed by my father's trusted right-hand man, Mr. Thorne. His gaze met mine for a brief, affirming second before he turned his full attention to Charles, who was still fumbling with the damning papers. "Mr. Collins." Thorne's voice was quiet, but it carried a steel-edged authority that made Charles freeze. "It is clear you have gone to great lengths to conceal your activities from both the public and the authorities. Your actions have been under close observation for quite some time. Now, the full extent of your illegal dealings is being brought to light." Charles stared at Thorne, his face growing paler by the second. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound emerged. He looked like a man who had just woken up to find himself drowning in a sea of his own making. For the first time, I saw him as he truly was: weak. A man who had spent so long posturing as untouchable that he'd forgotten the fundamental law of gravity. The higher you climb, the harder you fall. Thorne continued, his voice unwavering. "You have been served with a court order to freeze all your assets. Every account, every property, every investment will be placed under immediate review. Any asset found to be tied to illicit activities will be seized, and further criminal charges will be pursued." Charles's wild eyes flickered to me, as if he was desperately trying to make sense of the nightmare. I stood my ground, my gaze steady. I didn't say a word. He had humiliated me before my family, but now the tables had turned with a vengeance. He had no concept of what it felt like to be on the receiving end of this kind of overwhelming power. For a moment, he seemed to rally, a flicker of his old defiance returning. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaky. "You think you can take everything from me based on a few fabricated accusations? You have nothing." Thorne didn't even blink. "We have everything we need, Mr. Collins. Your empire is built on a foundation of lies. The truth has a funny way of coming out, as you are now learning." As Charles sat there, his face a grotesque mask of rage and terror, I felt a strange sense of release. This was the justice I had craved, and yet it didn't bring the pure satisfaction I had imagined. It didn't magically erase the years of pain, the feeling of being made to feel small and worthless, but it gave me something far more valuable: closure. This was never just about tearing Charles down. It was about understanding that I was no longer bound by the fear and hurt he had inflicted upon me. I was not the woman who had quietly absorbed his insults and abuse. I now had power, not just from my father's influence, but from the stark realization that I was capable of so much more than I had ever allowed myself to believe. As the legal team began to pack their documents, I took a deep breath, knowing this was only the beginning. I wasn't just reclaiming what was taken. I was building something new, something that was entirely my own. Charles was broken, with nothing left to cling to. But for me, this was a rebirth. The woman who was once too afraid to speak, too timid to stand her ground, was finally, truly free. And I couldn't wait to see where this new path would lead. I watched as Charles's face contorted, shifting from disbelief to raw panic. His usually impeccable composure had shattered, slipping away with every calm, damning word the lawyer spoke. The air in the room was thick, almost suffocating, and a part of me, a primal part, wanted to scream. Not with rage, but with a complex mix of satisfaction and vindication. This was the moment I had yearned for, the moment when the world he had built on my quiet suffering would come crashing down, leaving him with no escape. But even in this moment of triumph, a strange, uneasy quiet settled over me. Was this really justice? Was this who I wanted to be? The architect of another person's complete ruin? To see the man I had once loved, had once trusted, reduced to absolute nothingness? My heart hammered a chaotic rhythm against my ribs, a cocktail of exhilaration and guilt. A part of me didn't want to see him completely break, but then I remembered his words, the sneer on his face as he mocked my family, as he dismissed everything I was. He deserved this. He had to. I remained in the background, a shadow against the wall, watching him sink lower into his chair. His eyes darted nervously around the room, the weight of the documents, the sheer, inescapable reality of his situation, finally crushing him. The lawyers were like surgeons, precise and methodical, presenting their findings with an unnerving calm, as if they were merely reading a weather report. But these facts were the storm that was tearing his life apart, and he knew it. "Mr. Collins," one of the lawyers began, his voice flat and steady, "we have documented the paper trail for your offshore accounts, traced the illegal transactions conducted under a variety of aliases, and have compiled evidence of several fraudulent real estate deals funneled through your primary business. Furthermore, we have corroborating evidence from several former associates, a number of whom are prepared to testify against you in court." Charles physically stiffened at the mention of witnesses. His mouth fell open, but he was speechless. His gaze flickered to me again, a wild, desperate look, before snapping back to the lawyers who were calmly laying out the architecture of the trap he had unwittingly built for himself. The walls were closing in, and I could see it in his eyes. His mind was racing, searching for an exit, a loophole, a way out. But there was no escape. Not this time. "You're making a huge mistake," Charles finally stammered, his voice trembling as he tried to project an authority he no longer possessed. This is all fabricated. You can't just— It is not fabricated, Mr. Collins, the lawyer interrupted smoothly. We have cross-referenced everything. Your signatures, the transaction dates, the fund transfers, it all aligns perfectly with the financial records we have obtained. He looked at me again, and this time, the look was one of dawning, gut-wrenching dread. You knew, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You planned this with your father, didn't you? This was all you. There was a flash of recognition in his eyes, a flicker of understanding. He had always underestimated me, written me off as the quiet, passive wife. But he was wrong. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was something so much more. I didn't do this alone, I replied, my voice steady but carrying the weight of years of suppressed pain. But I knew what had to be done. You crossed a line, Charles, and now you have to face the consequences. I watched him try to find something to hold on to, some argument or threat, but there was nothing left. The truth had cornered him, and there was no turning back. I couldn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. He had inflicted enough pain on me, on my family. This was the price. The lawyer continued, his words like hammer blows. We have also filed for the immediate and total freezing of your assets, your bank accounts, your stock portfolio, your properties. They are all under federal scrutiny as of this moment. Everything you thought you built is being dismantled, Mr. Collins. I saw Charles clench his fists, his knuckles turning white. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. I could hear the desperation cracking his voice as he finally broke. This isn't over. You don't know who I am. I can fix this. I can— His voice trailed off as another lawyer handed him a final stack of papers, injunctions, liens, court orders. Charles took them, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He scanned the documents, his eyes growing wider with each page. Finally, defeated, he looked up. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice breaking. I'll pay, okay? I'll give you anything. Just don't destroy me. I stood, frozen, a deep, suffocating silence filling the opulent office. I should have felt victorious. This was my moment of triumph, my justice. But instead, a strange, hollow emptiness gnawed at me. Was this what I truly wanted? To shatter him so completely? I realized then that it was never about destroying him. It was never about making him feel the same way he had made me feel. It was about reclaiming my own power, my own self-worth. I had let him define me for far too long, allowed his insults and arrogance to chip away at my soul. This wasn't about revenge. It was about taking back control. Charles, I said, my voice softer than I'd intended, this isn't just about you. It's about me. It's about what you did to me and to my family. I am done being your emotional punching bag. I am done being the person you thought you could walk all over. You're right about one thing. You can't fix this. It's far too late. I could see the final realization hit him, his shoulders slumping in utter defeat. The man who had been so full of pride and confidence was now just a shell, vulnerable and broken. It was heartbreaking in a distant, abstract way, but it wasn't enough to evoke any sympathy. His empire was built on lies and cruelty, and now it was falling apart. His wealth, his influence, the control he used to belittle me, it was all slipping through his fingers like sand. And it was all because he thought I was weak. He thought I was just some woman to be ignored. He was wrong. As the lawyers finished their work, Charles staggered to his feet, his face flushed with a final, pathetic burst of anger. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You haven't won," he snarled. "You don't know what I can do. You think you're safe, but you're not. I'll make you regret this." I took a step forward, my own fear now completely gone. "You can try, Charles, but it's over. You're finished." The lawyers packed their briefcases and stood ready to leave. I could feel the immense weight of the day pressing down on me. This was the end of a dark chapter and the beginning of something new. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was free, finally and truly free. As the final documents were signed and sealed, and the full weight of his new reality crushed him, Charles sat in utter silence. The room was heavy with the ghosts of his fallen empire, but I couldn't bring myself to feel a single shred of pity for him. Not sympathy, not regret. The man who had once been the gravitational center of my world was now a collapsed star, a hollowed-out shell of himself. It wasn't just his fortune that had been stripped away. It was his entire identity, his arrogance, his confidence, the very foundation upon which he had built his life. I stood across the room, a silent observer to his unraveling. He slumped in his chair, his face ashen, his eyes glazed with a vacant disbelief. He looked lost, like a man who had abruptly woken from a lifelong dream, only to discover that everything he cherished was nothing more than a mirage. His entire world had been predicated on power, on control, on making everyone around him feel inferior. And now, all of it was gone, slipping through his desperate fingers. For years, I had lived in his shadow, constantly second-guessing my place in his world. I had allowed him to diminish me, to mock my family and my past. And for what? For the privilege of being a part of his glamorous life, to be a player in a rigged game where the rules were always designed for me to lose? Not anymore. I was done playing by his rules. I was done being the woman who quietly absorbed his cruel jabs and condescending remarks. Charles tried to push himself up, but his legs trembled beneath him. He caught himself on the edge of his massive desk, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the polished wood. I watched him, impassive, my heart no longer entangled in the suffocating web of his manipulation. This wasn't about watching him suffer. This was about reclaiming my own strength, about standing on my own 2 feet for the first time in years. "Emily, please," Charles whispered, his voice raspy, almost pleading. I didn't mean it. Those things I said, I was wrong. I was just angry. You know how I get." His words were a pathetic, desperate scramble, his pride crumbling like the empire he had so meticulously constructed. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I let him squirm, watching the man who had once wielded so much power over me reduced to a broken figure, clinging to the last vestiges of his dignity. It was a bizarre, almost surreal spectacle. The man who had made me feel like nothing was now the one who was nothing. The roles had been so completely and brutally reversed. "You never understood me, Charles," I finally said, my voice steady, carrying a weight I had never allowed myself to express before. "You always saw me as an accessory, someone to be controlled, to be molded to fit your life. You never saw me for who I truly am, and now you're paying the price for your blindness." He flinched at my words, his eyes flickering with a pathetic mixture of anger and shame. I could see him struggling for the right words to salvage the situation, to beg for a forgiveness he didn't deserve, but the truth had erected an insurmountable wall between us. The damage was done. No amount of begging could erase the years of torment, of belittlement, of being made to feel less than human. "I don't want your apology," I said, my voice firm and clear. "I want you to face the consequences of your actions. You've been given every opportunity to be a decent human being, but you chose to build your life on hurting people, and now you're going to have to live with that." Charles looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if waiting for a sign of weakness, some indication that the old, forgiving Emily would take pity on him, but that person was gone. I was no longer the woman who would silently endure his cruelty. I wasn't the woman who would keep forgiving him just because he flashed a charming smile when he needed something. No, this was different. This time, I held the power. This time, I was in control of my own destiny. "Don't you get it, Charles?" I asked quietly, taking a deliberate step closer to him. "You ruined everything. Not just for me, but for yourself. You thought you could control the world, control everyone around you. But in the end, you were just running from the truth of your own inadequacy, and now it's finally caught up with you." His shoulders sagged in final, abject defeat. For the first time, I saw the man who had been so full of blustering pride as just another human being, vulnerable, broken, and alone. I realized then that this was never about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at him for all the ways he had hurt me. It was about recognizing my own strength, my own intrinsic worth. This was my moment to stand tall and declare, "I will not let you hurt me anymore." The silence between us was deafening as I stood there, watching the man who had once made me feel so small, now reduced to a mere shadow of his former self. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt liberated. It was as if a crushing weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a burden I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Charles spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "What happens now, Emily?" I paused, considering his question. What did happen now? What was next for me? The truth was, I didn't know. I had no map for the future, but for the first time, I felt like I had the power to draw it myself. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't someone who had to passively accept the life they'd been handed. I was someone who could choose. And that simple fact made all the difference in the world. "What happens now," I said slowly, "is that I walk away from all of this. I'm leaving you and this whole sordid mess behind, Charles. I'm moving on." He didn't respond. He just sat there, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly on his desk. I could see the last of the fight drain out of him, the last embers of his pride withering into ash. And I realized that I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from a version of myself that had allowed this to happen. I was walking away from the woman who had been too afraid to speak up, too afraid to stand up for herself. And I was stepping into a new version of me, one who was strong, independent, and no longer afraid. With one last lingering glance at the man who had once been my entire world, I turned and walked out of the room, my footsteps steady and sure. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was the closing of a chapter in my life that would never be opened again. I had taken back my power, and I would never, ever let anyone take it from me again. The door closed softly behind me, but the sound resonated like a seismic shift, marking a definitive end. I stood in the silent hallway for a long moment, my back to the office, my mind struggling to process the cataclysmic events that had just transpired. Charles, the man who had once wielded absolute power in our relationship, the man who had delighted in making me feel small, was now a broken shell. His empire was in ruins, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a profound sense of freedom. But intertwined with that freedom was a strange, hollow emptiness, as if a fundamental part of me, however painful, had been surgically removed. I leaned against the cool marble wall, staring at the polished floor, listening to the sound of my own breathing in the stillness. What now? The question echoed in the vast empty space of my future. What was I supposed to do with this newfound power, with this new sense of self that had emerged from the ashes of my old life? For so long, my identity had been inextricably linked to my relationship with Charles. I had been the wife, the supporter, the quiet endurer of his moods and cruelties. But now that role was obsolete. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was something more. But what was it? My mind flashed back to the early days, to a time when everything had felt so full of promise. Charles had swept me off my feet with his ambition, his boundless confidence, his intoxicating belief that together we could conquer the world. But somewhere along the way, that charm had curdled into manipulation, and his ambition had twisted into something ugly and rapacious. The man who had promised me the universe had ended up making me feel like I wasn't even worth a single star. But now, I had taken back control. I had walked away. And as I stood there in that sterile hallway, I realized that this was my chance to finally start living for myself, to build a life that was truly mine, not defined by the man I had once loved, and not constrained by anyone else's expectations. It was time to create a future that was authentic to who I was. A future where I was the one calling the shots, where I was the one in control. I could feel the weight of that decision settling onto my shoulders, but it was a good weight, a grounding weight. There was no turning back. I was not the same woman who had walked into that office just hours ago. I wasn't the same woman who had stayed silent for years, who had allowed herself to be pushed around and diminished. I had discovered something deep inside myself, a core of strength that was unshakable. And now, it was time to live from that place. I took a deep cleansing breath, letting the silence wash over me for one final moment. The world outside the building was still humming along, peaceful and orderly, but inside of me, everything was in motion. My heart was still racing, my thoughts were still scattered, but one thing was crystal clear. I was not going back. I would not let the past define me any longer. As I made my way toward the building's grand exit, I found myself walking with a new purpose. My steps were steady, firm. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt the warmth on my face like a benediction. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt free. I had wrested back control of my life, and no one, not Charles, not anyone, could ever take that away from me again. The city around me seemed to thrum with a new energy, a landscape of infinite possibilities. There were so many things I wanted to do, so many places I wanted to see. But for the first time, I didn't feel the suffocating pressure of someone else's expectations on my shoulders. I was finally free to chase my own dreams, to discover what I truly wanted from life. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen for a moment. There were so many people I needed to talk to, my parents chief among them. I had a million questions about my father, about the legacy I had unknowingly inherited, about what my future might now look like. But I couldn't reach out to them yet. Not until I had a chance to figure out who I was on my own terms. Not until I had taken the time to rebuild myself from the inside out. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in far too long. A friend, a woman I had known for years, before my life with Charles had consumed me. I needed to connect with someone who knew the me from before, someone who would understand the journey I was embarking on. The phone rang twice before she answered. Emily? Her voice was a warm, welcome surprise. Is everything okay? A genuine smile spread across my face. I leaned against the cool glass of the skyscraper. Yeah, everything's fine, I said, my voice sounding stronger and clearer than it had in years. Actually, I need a favor. Oh? She sounded intrigued. What's up? I want to start over, I said, the words feeling both terrifyingly heavy and wonderfully light. I want to do something for myself. I need to get away for a while. Away from this city. Away from everything. Do you think you could help me find a place to land? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a soft, knowing laugh. Of course. I know just the place. We'll make it happen. Just tell me when. A wave of profound relief washed over me. It wasn't a grand, sweeping gesture. It was a small, simple start, but it was a concrete step toward rebuilding my life, toward creating a space where I could just breathe, where I could figure out who I was, what I wanted, and how to get there. After the call ended, I stood there for a long time, watching the endless flow of traffic, the anonymous faces moving through the city. But for once, I wasn't trying to keep up. I wasn't following anyone's lead. I was choosing my own path. In the days that followed, I took small, deliberate steps. I gathered the scattered pieces of the life I had left behind, sorting through old memories and consciously letting go of the things that no longer served me. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be days of doubt, moments when the loneliness would creep in and test my resolve. But I also knew, with a certainty that resonated in my very bones, that this was my time. My chance to rebuild, to reshape my life into something that felt true and whole. I didn't need Charles to complete me. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I had found that within myself. And as I moved forward, I knew that nothing and no one could ever take that from me. The future was a blank page, and for the first time in a very long time, I was excited to start writing. I had walked away from the past, and now it was time to embrace the unknown, and I was ready, more than ready. If you've enjoyed this journey of empowerment, transformation, and justice, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Stay tuned for more tales that will inspire, challenge, and captivate you. Your support means the world, so hit that subscribe button and be part of our growing community. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. End of story.